All right, we're live. Okay, so I'm here with Harley and Travis. Um, if anybody wants to find Travis, he is under the YouTube channel Travis Talks, and I'll put a link in the description. And then Harley, have you started doing YouTube channel yet?
I haven't, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I don't think people are that interested to hear
We're,
my thoughts, to be honest.
I think you're an excellent debater, whether people agree with you or not. Anyways, I'm going to try to help you set up a YouTube channel one of these days. Okay, so before we get going, we're going to talk about abortion, and I just want to point out a thing that's kind of interesting about this talk is that you guys disagree, and I am on the fence between your two positions. So Harley here is pro-life, I believe, at the point of conception, just being in favor of no abortions, and then Travis here is to some degree in favor of a cutoff at sentience. Um, I'm somewhere in between those two, so this will be interesting because this will be somewhat of a debate or conversation where I'm the moderator, but I'm also going to share my opinions, like moderators usually don't or aren't supposed to. But this will be interesting to see if either can convince me more to lean towards one way or another. So that'll be interesting. And I'm going to challenge these guys as well, whether it's through hypotheticals or even just playing devil's advocate if I challenge an opinion I hold myself. So that'll be pretty interesting. But yeah, so let's start it off with Harley. What is your stance as far as if you could convince people of what you think a policy should be for abortion in a society that you would desire?
Sure. So it's nice to know we're fighting over you in this debate, Carson. I'm
Yes.
desperate to win it, but yeah, my position is, I suppose you could call it a hardline, extreme pro-choice, pro-life position, which is I believe that abortion is wrong from conception and it's wrong for any reason. Um, so I don't take the exceptions, that a mother is too poor to have a child, or the usual sorts of things about like rape or incest, those kinds of things, difficult topics to talk about. But I don't make exceptions for those. Um, that's basically my position, to be honest.
Okay.
In terms of an ideal society for me would be one in which abortion was not legal at all. Um, it's a society, I believe, that can be achieved, and there are lots of things that I'd like to see done to achieve that. But yeah,
Okay.
that's it really.
All right, Travis, same question to you.
Okay, so to clarify my position a bit, I have kind of what's like a tentative position. I'm open to it being like I'm not super hardcore on it. I'm open to being moved somewhat on it, but basically my view would be that prior to the onset of sentience, I don't see any moral issue with abortion at all. I think it's totally fine. I think after the point of sentience, it gets a bit more murky. Um, I don't necessarily think that just after the point of sentience, it's necessarily going to be wrong. I think it gets murky. Right now, I would say my cutoff point that I put it at is I put it at a cutoff of 12 weeks, based on the fact that that seems to give like the woman a good amount of time. Like about 90% of abortions are performed within the first 12 weeks. And also, I'm basing this off of a paper. There's a paper called Reconsidering Fetal Pain, which basically argued for a position that the fetus may start feeling pain at about 12 weeks. So
Hmm.
that's kind of what my position is based off right now.
Okay. Yeah, go. You guys can challenge each other's thoughts, and then I will jump in whenever I feel like it.
Sure. I mean, Travis, would you like to start? Do you have any questions for me, or would you like me to take the reins?
Yeah, I actually do have a question for you. I saw you in the YouTube comments of another abortion video on this channel, and I think you said something like it's contradictory or it's inconsistent um, for someone to think that a fetus or an embryo is a human, but also to think that aborting it is morally acceptable. Is that your view?
Yes, yes. So there is a phenomenon, as I'm sure you're aware, people with, I'd say, a more extreme position than yours, who openly admit, and I've seen videos even from some abortionists who admit that what's in there is a human being, even as early as conception, um, but that they're comfortable with killing it anyway, and so I'm against that.
Yeah, so I don't think those people are actually more extreme than me in that respect, because I also would say that it's a human from the point of conception, and I don't see a problem with killing it up to a certain point. And I just be interested, like if you're saying that's an inconsistent position to hold, I'd be interested in hearing what exactly the contradiction is.
Well, I suppose the contradiction comes from the reasons for which you justify the killing. So we, as a general rule, in any kind of system of morality, forbid the killing of humans as a basic starting point. We protect the sanctity of life, and that goes from the most, extreme atheist position, say objectivism, Ayn Rand kind of atheism, all the way through to kind of fundamentalist Christianity or Islam. Is there is a basic respect for the rights of people to live unaffected by others. So the pro-abortion position or the pro-choice position, however you prefer to call it, enters in or submits that there are certain conditions that a human being must meet in order to be considered valid or worthy of rights. And I think that all of those reasons that are given are contradictions in the sense that most of them, in many ways, when they refer to the features of the unborn human, they are inconsistent and contradictions in that they also apply in many cases to the born as well, and they are not consistently true for all human beings at all times equally at every time. And so what you tend to have is people will say, for example, one of the comments you made, and I know the study you're referring to about the fetal pain thing, they'll say, well, prior to 12 weeks, there is no sensation of pain. Therefore, because there is no sensation of pain, there is no moral consideration due to the unborn human. However, if you were to then say to a person, what about people with a condition called congenital analgesia, which is a condition which prevents its sufferer from experiencing sensations of pain? Are those people less human? Can they be killed in the same way that unborn babies can be killed? And the natural answer, and the correct answer, I would say, is no. Which begs the question, if their lack of sensation of pain doesn't cause them to lose their rights, then why does the lack of sensation of pain in an unborn human, however it's defined from 12, say, to 20 weeks, why is that sufficient to deny the unborn baby its rights?
So I would agree with you that some pro-choicers may have inconsistent views, but I don't think that that's simply acknowledging, taking a view that a fetus or an embryo is human. I don't think that logically entails that that it's wrong to kill that being. If there's certain background assumptions working in there, then you might have a contradiction. But I don't think simply those two propositions would form a contradiction. Like, on my view, I think it's human. I also don't see necessarily a problem with killing it. I don't place any moral value on humanity. I don't see that as a morally relevant characteristic. So I don't like if you're. I just want to know if like you would say my position is contradictory, and if so, I'd want to hear what the contradiction is, because right now I'm not
Well,
seeing any contradiction on my view.
yeah. So I think that the thing with your view is that you've expressed a view which I would say is probably not within, let's say, the mainstream of general morality. I think most moral systems do uphold that there is a sanctity to human life, and so I guess I would ask you, on what grounds do you assert? I mean, not even on what grounds do you assert that you have a right to life individually?
On what? So the question is, on what grounds do I assert that I have a right to life?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would say that I have a right to life because I'm conscious and I have a certain level of cognitive complexity that grants the right to life.
Okay, but I suppose the question is then that you say that I think what you said before, that you don't place any particular emphasis on humanity as a moral sort of unit. So would it be more accurate to say that you place an emphasis on any living being as having moral value and the right to life?
No, not any living being. I would say that any conscious being, I place some amount of moral consideration. I think that all conscious beings, all beings capable of having hedonic states, at least, or have some degree of moral value. They don't all necessarily have the same degree of moral value, but I would see consciousness as the morally relevant trait, not humanity.
Okay,
I'm gonna hop
and
in real
so
quick just to get some clarification. Travis, when you were saying that you think that you should have a right to life based on consciousness and so on and so forth, are you making a claim of something like natural rights? Like if you and a random person were just out in nature, no society, and that person wanted to kill you, do you think that there is some fact about the world that you actually do have rights? Or are you just saying, in your opinion, you think we should grant each other rights?
So it depends a bit what you mean by natural rights. If you're asking me whether I think there's some stance independent fact of the world that I have moral rights, then no, I don't think that.
Okay, that's kind of what I was clarifying. It sounded like you were making that claim, and I think maybe it was just a misunderstanding. So I thought I would get that idea out there. So your stance is that your personal opinion is that not only you have should have rights, but you think other humans as well. So it's just like a personal opinion, not that rights exist outside.
Yeah, I would say relative to my moral standards, conscious beings have moral value.
Okay.
And you said, just to clarify on another thing, that you said that you don't believe that all living beings. Okay, so there's a distinction between obviously plants there, and there may even be a distinction between animals, different types of animals. I suppose one question then I would ask about the degrees to which you would apply this is: would you say, or do you believe that human beings are more important in the moral sense than, say, any other animal? So take any animal, for example, a relatively intelligent animal, a rat, for example, is relatively intelligent, capable of basic puzzle solving. Would you consider human beings to have greater moral value than a rat?
It depends a bit what you mean by greater moral value.
Are they more deserving of the protection of rights? Should they be treated differently in the domain of rights, and should the people who violate those rights be punished to a greater degree than for the rat?
I would say that I would put it this way. There are certain traits that humans have that are going to make me care about their lives more than rats. So humans have, for example, like I said earlier, they have a much more complex mental capabilities than rats. So that's one thing. Humans also have a much longer lifespan than rats. So those are two factors that would make me say that I think humans have great. Generally speaking, yes, I would say that humans have greater moral value than rats, but it's not because they're human.
So it's not because they're human; it's because they possess an essence of humanity in their cognitive function that makes them a higher order being in a sense, morally speaking.
I wouldn't frame it as an essence of humanity. I would just say that I value beings with higher cognitive capacities. Beings who have more complex experiences, I value those beings more.
Okay, and I suppose then the one word question for that would be why? What difference does it make?
Why? Well, the reason would be because I think if you look at the entailments of, if I were to take a view that that all sentient life has exactly equal moral value, regardless of cognitive complexity, then I think you're going to get to some pretty absurd conclusions. Like you'd have to say that if I had a choice between saving, an ant or a highly complex, like just a typical human who's has far more complex cognitive capacities than an ant, I think it would be pretty absurd to say that an ant losing their life that's as bad as a human losing their life. So the reason I take that view is just because I think denying that view leads to consequences that I would consider absurd.
Okay, so I suppose a couple of questions then would be, so because I'm asking these questions just to get a sense of where you're coming from. So a question I would ask then, say there was a rat or a mouse in my house, would it be justified for me to kill it to get it out, in your worldview?
Yeah, I would say probably yes.
Okay, and so, and I would say then, so equally, if, for example, farmers will sometimes fumigate rats, kill them in the dozens or the hundreds, in order to, protect livestock and protect the sanctity of the barns and the integrity of the local wildlife, for example. So you wouldn't consider it to be morally wrong for them to do that. You wouldn't consider it mass murder or something like that.
Not necessarily. I would consider not necessarily if it's being done with like the purpose you described, I wouldn't necessarily consider that to be wrong, but there are other instances of killing animals in which I would consider that to be mass murder. For example, the mass breeding and slaughter of animals that we do every year so we can consume their corpses. I would consider that mass murder.
Okay. So, and then a follow-up question, just to end this kind of thread of the conversation, which is that you said it's okay for me to kill a rat if it's in my house. You would not, presumably, based on your sentience argument, be satisfied if I were to say kill a 15 or 20-week-old fetus. That would be unacceptable. You don't think that should be permissible?
No, I don't.
Okay, so then there's a contradiction there, which is that the rat that I kill has a higher cognitive ability than the 15 to 20-week-old fetus. So if your judgment of moral value is based on the complexity of the cognitive function of a being, then you you cannot permit the murder of a rat over the murder of a 15-week-old fetus, because the rat is higher within that hierarchy at that point.
Well, I'm just going to need to hear what the contradiction is. Like, what is the proposition and the negation that I would be committed to?
Well, so you're creating, as you've said, you're creating a kind of hierarchy of consciousness. There is a degree of consciousness which you consider to be valuable, and so you would consider, as you said, an ant to be significantly less valuable than a human being, and there are various reasons for that. And you've also said that you consider a rat to be less valuable than a human being, again for various reasons related to the experience of those beings. However, when asked, is it permissible to kill a rat? You say yes, but then you say, is it permissible to kill a 15-week-old fetus? You say no. You're breaking out of your ranking system, your hierarchical ranking system. You're inadvertently applying a greater moral value to the human being, irrespective of its cognitive ability, and
No,
you're dismissing the rat as unimportant.
I don't think that's an accurate characterization of my views. I think that you're making an assumption that is not something I actually said. When I said that I value cognitive capabilities, I think you're making an assumption that I only value current cognitive capabilities, when actually I value the potential for cognitive capabilities as well, starting at the point of consciousness. So a 15-week-old fetus, well, maybe it has a lower degree of cognitive complexity currently than a rat. It's going to, over time, it's going to develop into a much greater cognitive complexity than a rat. So no, I don't see a contradiction. If you had a fetus, if you had a human that had the same cognitive complexity as a rat, and you just equalized all the morally relevant characteristics, like say the human would always stay in that state, so they would not develop a greater complexity over time. They'd always be in that state. They'd always, or like let's say they had the same lifespan as the rat too. You just equalize all the morally relevant characteristics. Then no, I wouldn't see that as very different. If the human had, there's like some situations in which I would view an animal as more valuable than a human. Like if you had a human with lower cognitive complexity than an animal, and again, it stays at that point, you equalize all the traits, then no, I would view the animal as more valuable.
You would view...
Really quick, Harley, before you respond to that, I want to add one more element in just to clarify, because I think there's something you might not understand about Travis's stance. When you say that it's either morally or should be legally acceptable to kill the mice or the rat in your house or at a farm, is this based on location and outcome from not being able to communicate with the rat and the rat destroying things? So if somebody went out into nature and there was just a rat in nature running around, not causing any harm, and somebody had a gun and for fun they wanted to kill it, they weren't going to eat it, they weren't going to do anything with it, they just for fun wanted to kill it, would you view that as a different stance? Like as if that was filmed, if somebody was caught on a security footage, would you say that it would be reasonable to make that illegal to randomly just kill rats for fun in nature?
Yeah, I do think hunting should be illegal.
Okay. So I just thought that might help with your questioning, Harley, knowing that his stance isn't just accepting of killing rats. It's situational. So anyways, go on.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, situational or not, there is I would say an exception being made for in the case of getting the rat out of the house by killing it, for I would say a level of unnecessity that has been permitted, and it's out of step with, as I explained, out of step with what I think is this kind of hierarchy that is built up. But then he did answer, and sorry, I'm not addressing you directly, Travis. Sorry, you did say that that you think that you value the potential of a creature, you value You're not basing your degree of importance, your degree of moral importance on what the creature is at the moment. You're basing it on what it has the capacity to be. So I suppose then the objection that I would have to that is that every being from the moment of conception, every sentient creature from the moment of its conception prior to having sentience is a continuous entity. It's a continuous organism. So the you that you are now was the you that you were at the moment of conception. And as I explained to Carson in a previous podcast we did together, which you may or may not have seen, the you that you are now, everything about you, your height range, your shoe size, your skin color, and all those kinds of things are embedded in the genetic code of the being that is created at the start. That being has a rational capacity embedded in it that will develop. And so the 12 weeks that you permit it to be killed, it does still have that potential. It is still developing towards the same end as the sentient being at 12 weeks. So that would be my objection. So here's the question on the back of that then that I would ask. It's a question I put on a podcast here with Carson before, so you may have considered it or not. The drug thalidomide, you may be familiar with it. The drug thalidomide was available in my country, Great Britain, in the late 70s, I think it was, early 80s, and it was a morning sickness drug. So it prevented pregnant women from suffering the sort of excesses of morning sickness, which, as you may be aware, can be, quite severe and quite difficult. The problem with the drug, and the reason that it was taken off the market for these prescriptions, was because it caused a very high rate of miscarriages and particularly birth defects. So missing limbs, defective body parts, corrupted, warped facial and bodily features. But the women who took thalidomide would take it between the first week and the 10th week, and after that it would not be effective. Between the first week and the 10th week, as you know, are the weeks where the being is not sentient and therefore in your framework has no rights. So the question is, can a mother take thalidomide in the first 10 weeks, or do you have a moral objection to her doing so?
Now, I have a moral objection to that, but that's because it harms a future person.
Well, so does abortion.
I don't think that's the case. I think abortion prevents a person from coming into existence. I don't think it harms a future person.
Well, it denies the problem with killing someone is that it denies them their future. It steals their future. That's what we say. It's the expression that we use. And an abortion also does the same. It removes the potential of that being, that developing being, which is moving towards the sentience. It destroys that. It removes it. And your argument seems to be, it's the argument that a lot of pro-choicers make. It's worse to hinder someone than to kill them. I don't personally find that to be justified. I don't think that it is worse to give someone a horrible life, to put someone in a horrible position, as opposed to taking their life. I think that their life is the foundation of the values that you would use to make the judgment. So you're bypassing the foundational rights, the foundational the foundation of the values that they have, to say that it's wrong to do that, while dismissing their right to the very foundation it's based on.
Yeah, so I wouldn't accept that characterization of my view, where you say I'm okay with hindering someone, but I'm fine with killing them. When a fetus is aborted prior to the onset of sentience, I don't think you're killing someone. you're killing a being. I don't think that's someone that you're killing. In the same way that if I kill a plant, if I kill some weeds, I don't think I've killed someone. I haven't killed them. I've killed a non-sentient being with no moral value. I don't think I've
You've
killed
killed a
someone by doing that.
Okay, well, you've killed a continuous entity. You've killed something which has the capacity and is developing into exactly the type of being that you would protect. And there becomes a problem here about exclusion, which is that there are people who are born who meet the criteria for non-sentience. So, for example, there are people who are in chronic vegetative states who do not have any or many of the markers of sentience that you would use to measure whether a fetus is viable for an abortion or not. But you wouldn't, I assume, advocate for the killing of those people.
So the people that you're talking about, or the humans that you're talking about, you're talking about someone that it's going to depend on the circumstances. If you're talking about someone who has a condition where they were sentient, now they're non-sentient, and we expect them to regain sentience, then no, I wouldn't be okay with killing them. But if you're talking about a human being has that has a permanent condition, they're permanently non-sentient, but they're still alive, then no, I wouldn't have an intrinsic problem with killing them. I don't think they have a right to life. If I had to choose between saving a permanently brain-dead human or a rabbit, I would rather save the rabbit. The rabbit has infinitely more moral worth than that human in that case.
Well, a brain dead. This is the differences I'm talking about is that there's a difference between the chronic vegetative state and someone who is brain dead. So someone who is brain dead is dead effectively. Their body may just be being fed and allowed to function, but their body as a whole entity is no longer working together for the continuation of all its parts. And the brain being the central mechanism by which the body does that. If that goes, then that's it. The person is done. But people who are in chronic vegetative states can often be dead to the world, to use an expression, dead to the world for 5, 10, 20, 40 years, at which point they, for all intents and purposes, have no measurable level of sentience, don't dream, don't hear, don't feel pain. They have none of the markers of sentient being. And I presume that those people would not be eligible for death, but they mirror the unborn almost identically. The only difference between them and the unborn is they happen to have previously an experience. But as you've said, you don't value that. What you value is the future potentiality of a sentient being, but they're not a sentient being. So would you kill them, or
are we talking about a human who has a reasonable probability of regaining sentience, or are you talking about just, okay, they're permanently non-sentient?
No, it's someone. So a chronic vegetative state is a state of unconsciousness in which the person has a very high likelihood of never waking up. But they actually renamed it. They used to call it a persistent vegetative state, and they basically said that people don't wake up from these. They've now referred to it as a chronic vegetative state because actually we have the means to actually wake people up and provide them with medication, and also people do wake up after extended periods of time from these things. So that's it basically. People who may have no chance, or well, who have hardly any chance, but there is still a chance.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to depend on the probabilities. Like, just let's say they had virtually no chance of regaining sentience. We're almost virtually certain that, virtually guaranteed that this human being is not going to regain sentience, that they're permanently non-sentient. Yeah, in that case, I don't think that human has intrinsic moral value. Now, they may have instrumental moral value, but no, they wouldn't have any intrinsic moral value if they're going to be permanently non-sentient, or very likely permanently non-sentient.
I'm going to hop in here and ask a quick question along the same lines that Harley was asking. I think this is a very interesting challenge, and I've been meaning to ask somebody about it, and this is my first opportunity. So imagine somebody, this is for you, Travis. Imagine somebody went into a coma, and we knew that they were going to come out of the coma, but they were going to, every element of what we view as sentience was essentially going to be wiped away from them. They have no family members. They have nobody that's going to remember them. If most people, when they come out of a coma, they are the same person. They have their same memories. But let's say this person, every memory is going to be essentially wiped, and they don't even know how to speak English or whatever language they spoke. They're going to essentially be, let's say they're 30 years old. They're going to be a 30-year-old adult baby. They're going to have to relearn how to speak. And as soon as they learn how to speak, they're going to function perfectly fine. But anything we view as their consciousness, all that left and will come back. And they just essentially will be like a baby born. So their time in a coma is essentially like the time of a zygote or an embryo for the first like 12 weeks of life. Would you say that it potentially could be acceptable to pull the plug knowing that they're going to come out and be a perfectly functioning great human?
So just to clarify, you're talking about someone who they have a coma, they lose sentience, and then when they get out of the coma, you're saying that they don't retain the same mind?
Essentially, yeah. Just that their mind, all their memories are wiped. They're going to have to learn language again. They're going to be as if they were a baby. You just imagine it being a 30-year-old baby, and it's kind of just removing the idea of, usually say somebody says, once you've gained sentience and consciousness, then you are protected for the rest of life, even if you're going to lose it during a coma or whatever. So this is kind of an argument to say, well, if we know the person coming out is going to be unrecognizable as far as looking at their brain, but their brain is perfectly fine and healthy, it just got like rebooted for them. Do they deserve protection, I guess is what I'm asking.
I think if you're talking about someone who their conscious, it seems like you're talking about an individual who their consciousness gets basically extinguished, and then when they come back, they have an entirely new consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, in that situation, if their consciousness gets extinguished, then I would think, like in the period, I would lean towards they don't have intrinsic moral value.
All right.
Well, I mean, I would say in to that, that's actually what Destiny said in the debate between him and
Yeah,
Trent Horn on the
I watched
whatever
that
podcast.
debate.
He said that it was morally questionable. If it was a slightly different question, if someone was to go into a vegetative state and suffer complete amnesia and come out of it after 9 months, would they? And we knew that that was going to happen. Would that be a person that you would be permitted to kill within that period? And he said, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it. My personal view is the fact that you have to think about it demonstrates the problem with your view, which is that you have a person here who you know will become sentient again, okay, and they're there on the table, and you don't believe they're deserving of rights purely for they don't have a sentience right now. So you have this vulnerable person, defenseless person on the table right now, suffering this trauma, whether it's the amnesia thing, whether it's the brain defect that Carson mentioned, and you're okay with that person being non-personed. And it's the second thing that has raised my eyebrows in this conversation. The first thing that raised my eyebrows in this conversation was when you said that you would value some animals over some disabled human beings, some human beings who had cognitive problems and required help and support. You thought that there are some animals who are deserving of more moral consideration than that person. I don't think that's right. I think I think most people would consider that to be a concerning moral position. I think one of the analogies that I like to use in this regard is the case of a dog who cannot bark. You have the case of a dog who cannot bark, but a dog barks. It's still a dog, even though it can't bark. Barking is integral to a dog, but it's still a dog. Now, in the case where you have a dog who cannot bark, do you treat the dog who cannot bark more or less well? Now, in my worldview, you attempt to treat that creature which has a defect better. You pay more attention to it so that you can gather from it what it needs. A dog that can't bark can't tell you that it's scared. It can't tell you that it's hungry through its normal mechanism. It needs other things which you require more attention to provide. That's my worldview, and my worldview is the same for unborn humans and also humans in chronic vegetative states who have predictable cognitive problems, and disabled people who have predictable cognitive problems, which is that these people are more vulnerable, and the moral action to take in response to that is to pay them more attention, to provide them with more care, to protect them against things which they cannot defend themselves against. And so, you know, that's I think that's a better worldview than the worldview that dismisses someone in the way that you dismissed people.
Okay, so
No offense.
since you're saying that you have a better worldview and that I'm taking concerning moral positions, I'd just like to ask you a few questions about your view, because I suspect that even if people find the views that I'm taking here counterintuitive, I suspect that the views you take are actually going to be more counterintuitive to people. So let me first ask you the question. You say like you place intrinsic moral value on the characteristic of humanity, correct?
Yes.
So, okay, so I have a follow-up question to that. Do you think that humanity is do you think humanity is do you think that's just a sufficient condition for moral value, or do you think that's a necessary condition for moral value?
I think it's a necessary condition
So
to be,
you
and it's
position
not strictly human. Although humans are the only creatures that we know that can do it. I would, if I was to rename human rights to encompass, say, an alien species that had the same functions as, I would rename it as rational rights, reasoning rights, or volitional conscious rights. I would not, or volitional capacity rights. I wouldn't exclude animals which had the abilities, the cognitive, not just the cognitive abilities, but the cognitive capacity and function, sort of foundation that we had. I hope that makes sense.
So when you say you value humanity, you're not using humanity. You're not using the standard species definition of just Homo sapiens. You mean something broader than that. You're referring to kind of a rational nature view.
Yes, yeah. There's nothing about a Homo sapien as I like the color blue. You know, it's not that kind of thing. It's that Homo sapiens have a particular faculty to them, which is where moral consideration and the reciprocal nature of rights even comes from. So
let me ask you a question. Are you vegan?
Absolutely not.
Do you?
I don't know if you've seen Carson and I's debate on that.
No, I haven't.
I'm pretty terrible. So
Do you? Do you? Okay, so I want to get a sense of like non-human animals, like the just the typical farm animals that we have, not some like hypothetical animal, but like the farm animals we actually have. Do you think those beings have moral value? Is it just like a diminished moral value, or would you say they have no moral value at all?
no, I don't think that they have any moral value. I think that you individual humans can make ethical considerations for them, but I don't consider them moral beings.
So you don't think that you can wrong an animal in any way?
No, that I think wrong is a broad scale term. There are unethical things that you could do. There are cruel and disgusting things that you can do to an animal, which I think most people would consider to be wrong. I don't. I would put it the other way, that there is no right that an animal can assert over a human being fundamentally at a foundational objective moral level.
Well, let me just ask you, if someone tortures an animal, let's say they skin a cat alive, why would that be wrong if cats do not have intrinsic moral value?
It would be an ethical question as to my preferences.
Your preferences.
Yeah, so my preference would be that I don't want to. I would say that I don't want to cause undue harm to an animal for pleasure. Basically, I find that to be distasteful. I think most people do. I think we do have a basic level of empathy for the suffering of animals, the suffering of any being really that we can kind of connect with on a basic emotional level. Certainly dogs, cats, they fall into that. So there are kind of personal, emotional, even maybe rational reasons, like logical reasons why a person wouldn't engage in that kind of activity.
Okay, but let's say someone had a different preference than you. They had a preference that, well, they do like to cause animals harm for fun. They do like to just torture animals for fun. If they did that, would you view that as unethical? Like, would you say they're doing something immoral by skinning the cat alive? Or is it just that you personally wouldn't do it yourself?
No, I mean, I would. I don't think. You see, I don't want to use the words moral, ethical incorrectly. What I would say is that that is an action that I would condemn. That is a person that I would not want to associate with. That is a person that I would want the law to impose a standard of decency upon. But at a fundamental moral level, I don't think that that creature has a kind of foundational right to assert over human beings. And for the reason that it simply it cannot, it doesn't even conceive of it. It is not of the faculty to do that. It is not of a particular form of consciousness to even be able to do that. It cannot reciprocate, which in the domain of rights, reciprocation is the entire game. It cannot reciprocate. It cannot conceptualize reciprocation. So it's not part of the moral framework as far as I'm concerned. However, ethically and legally, I think that there's things that you can do based on human taste, human empathy, human emotion, just basic logic and basic standards of decency.
I'm gonna hop in here real quick. Sorry to cut you off. Harley, just to challenge your idea a little bit. Travis maybe was going to do this anyways, but let's imagine there was a word that was like moral, but it was snorl, and that was the word that could be used for how we feel about the empathy of animals. It's just that it's kind of a semantics thing where you think the word moral should only apply to those that can reciprocate. Would you essentially agree with what Travis is saying if the word was snorl and it basically
I
empathy
I use
animals?
ethical. So I see that moral is kind of foundational. It's objective. It's it asserts itself irrespective of preference. It holds true irrespective of preference, and I think ethical is the consideration of what action to take outside the moral framework. So right and wrong from a kind of personal and societal sort of basis in terms of just like, I suppose decency is the word that I used. So I use ethical. That's probably not the right word to use, to be honest.
No, I think this
as I've said before, I'm no philosopher, but
I think this
that's the
is
distinction I made
with Immanuel Kant saying that morals have to do with somebody that is capable of moral agency. So yeah, I just want to throw that in there in case Travis's line of questioning would recognize that this is just a personal preference of how you, Harley, define the word moral. So you could use the word ethical when continuing the conversation, I guess.
Okay, yeah, we just have a semantic difference then, because I use the terms moral and ethical interchangeably. I don't differentiate those two terms. So you would say that that torturing a cat, it is still condemnable. And you
absolutely, 100%.
And you would impose that on other people. Like you wouldn't just say, "Oh, well, I might not like it, but people still are free to do what they want." Like if someone did that, you would think that, okay, we should stop that person, we should punish that person. That's your view?
Yes. I think there's grounds for laws being in place that protect standards of decency.
Okay. Do you consider it, I guess I'll use the word condemnable. Do you consider it condemnable to kill animals for food? Like in the context in which we do now, where it's essentially for trivial pleasures. We're not talking about a survival situation. We're just farming them for trivial taste pleasure. Do you consider that to be condemnable?
I think what I would pick up on there is that your conception of what you would consider trivial is what I would consider to be the human means of action. So humans are not. Humans are obviously natural, but humans are not natural animals in the sense that how we act in the world is not based primarily and directly, forthrightly on instinct. It's based on reason. And so our means of obtaining sustenance is not based on just knowing what to do in the way that a lion knows how to take down a gazelle or whatever else it is. We act on the world through production, through labor. And so what you say is frivolous, I would say is us more efficiently performing our basic means of acting as a creature. So I don't see it as frivolous. There are certainly practices that I could be convinced are frivolous. So, for example, I think I can't pronounce it. I'm sorry. Foie gras, is that foie gras? Which I think it got banned either somewhere close to us, France or something like that. And my initial reaction was, well, what the hell? But then I found out how it was produced, and I think that it's certainly an ethical gray area. It's quite. It sounds disgusting anyway, so I wouldn't have it anyway. But it certainly sounds revolting. The means by which it's produced. But then would I go so far as to say that we shouldn't be allowed to produce that nobody should be allowed to consume that? I think I would draw a line and say, no, I wouldn't say that. I think that, that would conflict with our means of acting in the world, acting on the fruits of nature to produce the things that we desire. So, yeah.
Okay, so you wouldn't consider just the why, like you wouldn't consider factory farming then to be condemnable. Just standard practice animal farming, which is virtually all of it's factory farming. You wouldn't consider that to be condemnable.
I think it's contextual. So, for example, in this country, there has been a particular debate, maybe not recently, but within the last 20 years, I would say, about the kind of British standards of producing meat and killing animals, which requires stunning and that sort of thing, versus the halal method, which is to cut the jugular of the animal. And there has been a substantial debate about that, because my country has a very substantial Muslim population who are mandated by their Quran to have halal meat, and it contradicts with the no stun basic standards of British meat that we have. And so I think that in terms of what's condemnable, I think it's contextual. So I think if there is a means by which you can do something that causes less suffering, then I think that there's an ethical consideration to be made there. For example, if there's a choice between stunning the animal before killing it or not stunning it, then you should make the effort, I think, and maybe even legally be required to make the effort to stun it. That seems like a basic level of compassion that can be implemented at the level of the law. Similarly, for example, if there was a distinction between collecting milk from a cow using metal cups versus more soft rubberized cups that didn't hurt them so much, then again the same thing would apply. So I think that there are practices that we can condemn in context and say this is unnecessary. The technology exists for us to produce this stuff without doing those things. However, that is contextual. I don't have a problem with it, basically, so, for example, the examples, this will be my last point because I've rambled on a bit, but as Carson says, if he was on an island and he was starving to death and he needed to feed his children, he would kill a chicken. Well, if the only way to kill that chicken was to bash its head in with a rock over the course of 10 minutes, I have no moral objection, or I would say in that context, ethical objection to somebody doing that, because I think that in that context, it's necessary for the person to do that to produce what they need. So, there's no fundamental objection to that.
In the context of what we have now, it's not necessary to farm animals at all. We can just farm plants. It's completely unnecessary what we have now, the entire system of animal farming. So I don't know where the necessary plays into it, because it seems like you're signing off on saying it is okay to cause it is okay to do it even if it is unnecessary, since you're signing off on typical animal farming being.
I'm going to do a 30-second. Well, hold on one sec. I'm going to do a 30-second recap because I talked to Harley for a couple hours on this and I broke it down pretty detailed and I can remember it really well. Travis, just so you can know his stance, in case you're bringing abortion back into it. After thoroughly challenging Harley on this, I believe his stance is, when it comes to any animals whatsoever, it's best not to cause pointless harm. But if you're getting something out of it that isn't just an emotional pleasure from something existing, then it's acceptable to do. So if you want to get milk from a cow, but the only way to milk a cow is to stab it with a large knife in its stomach, and enough milk came out for your coffee, and then that cow was going to die, and you only got milk once for your coffee, it's acceptable. So just so you can know the range of how Harley feels about this. Now, the problem would be if you're ever doing it to intentionally cause suffering just for the suffering. As long as you can get something out of it, it's acceptable to do. So that's And I don't mean that in any offense. I'm just pointing out that that's Harley's stance on what's acceptable. That way you don't have to spend too much time trying to break down how he feels.
Okay, so I just want to ask a question about that. Let's say that for whatever reason, it just was the case that we were stuck between two options. We could either farm animals, but for whatever reason, in order to farm animals, it was just necessary that we had to torture them in order to do it. Or we have a second option of farming plants. And there's no option of, okay, like let's farm animals, but like with less suffering. Like it's either a choice between we can farm animals, but it's necessary to torture them in order to do it, or we can farm plants. Would your view be that there's nothing wrong with farming animals in that situation, even though it causes them immense, extreme suffering, and we could easily just farm plants instead?
Yeah, I think that it's as I say it's an ethical consideration that each individual and each society can make. If a society decides to vote in favor of removing that in favor of some kind of plant-based alternative, if it's actually viable, which I would dispute, but we're not going to go into that. But then I think then that would be okay if that's the way that society wanted to vote. You live in a democracy, standards of decency. If that's the way that people felt, that's that. My personal preference is that at least for the moment, the plant-based alternatives are not suitable, not satisfactory for me, and so I continue to support factory farming, and I think that it can be done. I think it can be done in an ethical way to limit the suffering, and I think it probably, as we progress, there probably will be more plant-based alternatives, but there'll probably also simultaneously be much less impactful ways of actually doing factory farming as well. So I imagine the technology will keep me in stake for a good long while, but I guess we'll see on that.
So when you say that the plant-based alternatives aren't suitable, what do you mean by that? Do you just mean they don't taste good enough?
Well, that's one thing. They don't taste good enough. I don't think there is a full range of nutrition which is suitable for me. I know that vegans do like to. I mean, we'll go back to abortion and say, vegans do like to say that a plant-based diet is as effective as a meat-based diet. I don't think it is. I've done a little bit of research onto the extreme ends of both, extreme ends of veganism, extreme ends of carnivorism, and I think the results are quite clearly in favor of carnivorism. But it doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for my lifestyle. It doesn't work for my taste buds.
Just to push that a little further, if you could magically press a button, some God being thing could tell you, you will be the healthiest you could possibly ever be not eating animal products, would you say that it should still be acceptable to eat animal products, even with that knowledge?
For everyone or just for me?
Yeah, it will both. You can answer both separately. But it would be that this magical knowledge would just be that the healthiest a person could be would be to never touch animal products, but you could still, the same way we do now, like, well, not we as in me, but people do eat them. Would you still say that it's a right people have over animals?
I would still, well, I wouldn't say it's a right that I would say that the animal has no right to demand. I mean, it couldn't demand, but it has no right to expect that can't happen. It has no right to assert that couldn't happen. I think ethically, it's a consideration that I would have to make if there was a situation that was like that, which currently there isn't. I wouldn't be in favor of imposing it societally, but ultimately, if that's the way that society went and that was available, then I would be happy to accept that and go along with it. So that's my position on that. I do wonder what so I think you were going down this route to kind of expose some kind of contradiction in my worldview with regards to abortion, and I'm wondering whether I've satisfied your conditions or whether
Not
you're about to spring the trap.
not necessarily a contradiction. Just like an entailment that I think people would consider absurd. I mean, I think some of the stuff that you've said here would already be considered absurd to a lot of people. But let me ask you, so your view is that, okay, so you think that it's fine for a society to like democratically pass laws to that extent, but you don't have a problem with like an individual doing it. Like if an individual goes and buys, let's say in the scenario that I gave, where like the animals are being tortured, and they just have to be tortured in order to farm them, you wouldn't have a problem with like an individual going and buying those products, directly causing more animals to be tortured, even though they could just buy plant-based alternatives. And even if the alternatives were just as healthy, you wouldn't see anything condemnable about that, correct?
No, correct. My current sensitivity to it is significantly lower than yours.
Okay, and you would say that's because animals they don't have a rational nature.
Yeah.
So any being
well,
without
it's yeah. So because what we're talking about here is is to what extent the animal can claim rights naturally, which must be protected in law. So, for example, there are certain things which are standards of decency, which are society imposed. So they could be business regulations, whatever. There's nothing naturally necessary, naturally intrinsic to the human experience. But there are certain things like the protection of life, the protection of liberty, the protection of property, which are intrinsic to humans, which are necessary for a functioning legal system, which have to be codified as rights. I don't think that animals have any claim whatsoever to that category, that moral category.
Okay, I want to ask you the same question, but instead of animals, we have an alien species. And this alien species is made up entirely of beings that mentally, physically, they're more or less virtually identical to human infants. They always stay in that capacity. They don't have any rational nature. If we had a system in which if we farm those babies, and we tortured them, exactly the same as the animal hypothetical I gave earlier, these infant aliens, you would view that as not condemnable to purchase those products, directly causing more of these beings that are, again, mentally and physically identical, almost identical to human infants, you wouldn't have a problem with purchasing their corpses. Even if you could easily get just as nutritious, just as healthy plant-based alternatives. Is that correct?
Well, in essence, I think at root, yes, but I would disagree with the contention in there, which is that they're cognitively identical, because if they if they do not have the capacity for reason, in the volitional conscious sense, then they're not, then they're not morally equivalent. So and they're not cognitively equivalent either. So you would just be farming a goat that looks like a baby, or a cow that looks like a baby.
When you say that, well, I don't know actually what you mean when you say rational capacity. Like if we take certain infants, let's say we just have an infant that they're like have some mental disability, that they're never going to progress out of that state. I don't see how that human has a rational capacity, but the aliens that I just mentioned don't. Like it seems like neither of them have a rational capacity. Like neither of them will.
The rational capacity is embedded in the nature of its mind, and the infant or even the adult human being who has a diminished rational ability, if it cannot manifest that, it still has the capacity for it. But if it cannot manifest that, that's evidence of something wrong with it. So it's not a different type of being. It's a being which has an affliction. It's the same type of being. It just has an affliction. But it's the same species. It's the same type of being.
Yeah,
well, I think one issue that's happening here is it's part of a question that was already asked earlier, where I believe Harley's response was that part of it is what it's going to grow to be, and so I guess the question would be for Travis is in the same sense that you see value in all sentient beings. If there was an alien species that was the one you're describing, where their intelligence and their sentience is will always, for their entire lifespan, even as adults, will always be at the level of let's say a fetus or a newborn. Would you value humans more than you value that alien species?
Yeah, I would value the average human more than I would value like
Okay. Yeah.
an average member of that species that I'm talking about.
Well, that's, I suppose, to bring the conversation back to the kind of foundation of your view. So my view is, I think, fairly straightforward. It's a human being, a human being from conception. A human being from conception is a particular type of being, which is a being which exists within a moral realm. Therefore, as a human being, as a being in a moral realm, it deserves moral protections, one of which is the right to life. That's my position. Your position is that a being only deserves moral consideration when it has sentience. Okay, so I suppose we need to attack some of the assumptions in that. One of the things we haven't really got to is, why does sentience matter? What is it about sentience specifically that grounds moral value? One of the examples you used was pain. But as I said, there's a condition called congenital analgesia, where its sufferers cannot feel pain. But you wouldn't kill those people. So pain in itself is not sufficient. So can you give me another feature of sentience which matters to ground moral rights, that can't also not be possessed by a born person?
I don't think I would have any deeper reason. I just value consciousness.
Okay, so but like, what about it? Why is it important?
I don't know really what you mean when you say like, what about it? I don't have any further explanation. I don't have any further reason. That just is what I value.
Well, there's some. So what I mean is that there are certain. So every thing has an identity, and consciousness as a concept has an identity, and the identity is made up of specific characteristics. Okay. Now you're saying that possessing sentience itself grounds moral value. So what I'm asking is, what characteristic of sentience is the bit that adds the morality?
Yeah, like what would a rock have to gain that we would call sentience that would make it having more moral value than a rock currently has? I think is what he's asking.
I might just say hedonic states.
Can you explain that for not only myself that doesn't know what that is, even though Harley might, and then for anybody watching, what's a hedonic state?
So when I say hedonic state, I kind of mean like either pain, like suffering experience, like pleasurable or unpleasurable experiences, I would say. Like you have a being that's capable of, if a being's capable of experiencing happiness or suffering, then they have a hedonic state.
Okay, so that's the question then. So let's come up with 1,000 examples of pleasure or pain, and you can tell me whether, if any being can't do that, is it okay to be killed? So pain would be one of them. Okay. Any other frivolous example? For example, I'm drinking whiskey right now. Cheers. I love whiskey. You might hate it, or you might not even, because of a defect on your tongue, even be able to taste it. Okay, so taste, for example, is a sensation that causes pleasure or discomfort. If you can't taste, can you be killed? No. Touch. The touch can be pleasurable if you're lucky, or painful if you're not. If you have a condition where you can't feel, you have no sensation, can you be killed? No. You could do the same for sight. Sight is sensation, pleasurable, discomfort, all the rest of it. Hearing, all the senses, the five senses. Every single thing that you could do for those individually can be lost at any point by any person. Okay, or by any animal, as it turns out as well. You can have blind pigs and stuff like that. So none of those things, losing any one of those things, doesn't affect your rights at all. There is nothing, no sensation that you can lose that makes up sentience, no individual one that has any moral significance. If I lose my taste, that doesn't affect my moral value. If I lose my sight, it doesn't affect my moral value. So the moral value of every single facet of sentience is zero. And there are a million facets of sentience, all of which are valued at zero. So a million times zero is zero. So why does sentience matter if none of the characteristics of sentience have moral value whatsoever?
So I don't know why you're saying they don't have moral value. I don't see how that's. I'm not committed to that. Like,
because if a person who has them loses them, they don't lose their moral worth.
Sure, but that doesn't mean that that it doesn't have moral value.
Well,
There are
hold on. Let's check.
degrees of
Let's
moral
check if
value.
they. I'm
Like,
just curious if they. Sorry, just real quick. I'm just curious if they do kind of lose their moral worth in a sense. Like if somehow a human could all of a sudden lose their sentience, but they stay alive somehow. So they're kind of just like walking around zombies that obviously we'd have to hook them up with a feeding tube to keep them alive. But if they lose everything that we would call sentience, they lose their consciousness, they lose any form of ability to feel pain, suffering, sensations at all. I would say, and I'm curious what you guys would say, I would say their moral worth is gone. The only reason we keep them alive is because they're part of a species that the species on average, like similar to the human species has 10 fingers, even if some are born with 9. So the species has this moral worth. And because we want to feel protected in our societies, our governments, if possible, can grant us protections. So we would include them in the protection because they're part of our species. And if we didn't and we let them be killed, we would each have to fear for our lives. But I would say that zombie, non-sentient, non-conscious state human, it doesn't have moral worth. It just has reason to protect.
so.
Well, I think sorry, go on. I was gonna.
Okay. Carson, I was going to say that I basically agree with what you said. The way I would frame it is I would put it like this. Such a being, such a human that has lost sentience and isn't going to become sentient again, I would say that they don't have any intrinsic moral value. But there may be instrumental moral value there, but there wouldn't be any intrinsic moral value. In the same way that we would say for like other non-sentient entities, like for example, a rock or a plant, those things would not have intrinsic moral value, but they would have instrumental moral value. For example, if like a little girl has a pet rock, and I take that rock and I go and smash it onto the ground into a bunch of pieces, that would be wrong. But it wouldn't be wrong because the rock has intrinsic moral value. I haven't wronged the rock. I've wronged the girl. So I would say that humans in that scenario, they could have intrinsic I mean, they could have instrumental moral value, but they wouldn't have intrinsic moral value.
Gotcha. Harley, go
I
ahead
think
and respond to the thing I said, but after that, since we got to wrap up soon, I have a couple questions for you guys. So yeah, what were you going to say though?
yeah, I was going to say, so the type of zombie that you described, it does exist. It's a I was going to make a joke and say a Democrat voter, but no, it's someone who's brain dead, someone who's permanently and forever lost consciousness. Is just a body that can be kept alive, but that person is dead, is gone. They've lost the composition of their self. They've lost everything that holds them together. Their brain, which is the central processing unit to keep the unity of the human organism together, is gone, is dead. They're gone. And
do
so,
you think they have moral worth if they're still alive?
Well, no, because but they're not alive in a human sense. They are flesh being kept alive by a machine. They're a human corpse that's plugged into the electricity, basically. But I think the point about this, the point about the importance of sentience and whether it matters and whether it doesn't matter is that, and it's the question that I always asked, which is that give me the. So you say that sentience matters. Okay, so sentience is a concept. It's made up of characteristics, and give me the characteristic that is responsible for the morality, for the moral angle. And the point is that there isn't one. There isn't a single feature or function of the human animal other than just its capacity to be rational, its capacity to have rational thought and volitional consciousness that actually does that. And the rock example is a fantastic, is a good example. Another way to illustrate the point is, say that you have a fully conscious human, yourself, Carson, for example, and I start taking away facets of your consciousness. And so now what we're looking for is, as I take facets of your consciousness away, as I take facets of your sentience away, at what point do you lose the right to life? Because it's at that point that the last thing that I took away from you is the moral thing. So let's just use the senses. Okay, so I take your sight away, you can't be killed. I take your hearing away, you can't be killed.
I'll just give the answer of suffering. Now, right to life, as in what I think one should have, is different than what I think one should have in a society. But so yeah, let's just say out in nature. Yeah. So I think that if I have the ability to suffer and I can desire not suffering, then yeah, I would say I have at least the right to not be made to suffer.
Well, this is the issue, though, because we're determining why sentience is important. So let's just boil down sentience just to the five senses, the five basic senses. Okay, so once I've taken all five of those senses away from you and you can no longer experience that anymore, then your sentience is gone. Okay, so I'm going to take each one of these five characteristics of sentience away from you, and at which point do you lose your right to life? So let's say I take away four of your senses and the only one that's left is sight. Okay. And then I take your sight away. You're no longer sentient. You can be killed. So was it the sight that gave you the moral value? Well, no, because if I took the sight away first, you'd still have hearing and all the rest of it. You see, so none of the individual characteristics of sentience confer moral value on a person. So how, if none of the characteristics have moral value,
to suffer?
Well, hold on. We're talking about hedonic states. Hedonic states are what confer moral value. So it's when you talk about taking away the taste of, like you talk about taking away taste or taking away vision, those things don't have intrinsic moral value. They only have moral and value, and such as it leads to hedonic states. It's the hedonic states that matter. Like, it's the pleasure that comes as a function of any of those things that matters. The point at which the being loses moral value is when you've completely removed where you've completely removed its capability to experience hedonic states.
I think as I said, the issue with that is that all of the faculties that produce those hedonic states in themselves, when removed, don't affect the moral value of the entity. It's only when you remove them all that you would say that then that loses moral value. But the issue is that none of them individually have any significance whatsoever. So I would argue that if they don't have any significance individually, then 1,000 zeros still adds up to zero.
Yeah,
I don't
so
think that sentience matters.
I don't agree with that characterization. There is moral value that is altered. If you're, again, we're talking about the pleasure and pain. This is what's like intrinsically valuable, or this is what confers moral value onto a being. If you, if you like, if you like switch it off, if you take away all of a being's hedonic states, then yes, that being's lost moral value. But saying that, oh, well, we've kind of messed around with them a bit, like we've altered their hedonic states, but, or we've lowered like their happiness or something. Saying that, oh, well, we've done this, but that doesn't remove their right to life. That doesn't entail that. It doesn't have any effect on the moral value of the being.
Yeah, so I think the same criticism applies though, which is as Carson said. So Carson, you said it's about hedonic states. Carson said it's about suffering. I'll go with the angle of suffering. There are many different ways that suffering can manifest through the various different senses. So pain, for example, as we discussed before, pain is a measure of suffering, but there are no individual categories of suffering that can be removed from a person that would then make them a non-person if the others were still present. So, for example, just physical pain, if the ability to experience physical pain was removed, the being would still have moral value. So there isn't, even all of the constituent parts of a hedonic state individually don't matter. What matters is the hedonic state itself. But the problem is that to explain why, you have to give me an actual reason why that matters in a moral sense. Just having it is not sufficient because none of the parts of it, you don't need to have any of the parts of it individually.
I don't see why just
I'm not
having
convinced.
it wouldn't be sufficient.
But what's the reason for it? What if you were to make a compelling case to me that's not purely based on emotion, like having the ability to feel pain? I don't want people to experience suffering. It's like, okay, neither do I, but what's the moral case against that? What is it about having that specifically?
Well, yeah, so if you take any of these individual things and an action happening like making someone suffer or making someone feel pain is a wrong thing, then it wouldn't matter if you removed any of the individual ones. If there is an element that is wrong there, it's still wrong. So I just don't know if I follow.
Well,
so the question is why? Why is it wrong?
Well, it would just come down to the individual's stance on why it's wrong. So in my mind, suffering is not good. It's something that somebody does not want. It's something that somebody with our minds, we can know that if we weren't suffering, if we didn't feel pain, we would each individually view that as good. So in my moral framework, I don't think anybody should make anybody feel this thing. They shouldn't make them feel suffering, make them feel pain. I mean, anything outside of that, I can't imagine why anything matters.
Well, I'm just going to comment that we've hit, I would say, bedrock here. Like these kinds of questions that are being asked, you can ask this about anything. Like if you say, why is this wrong? And then I say, oh, because of this. And then you can say, well, why does that matter? And any answer I give, you can just keep asking a further question. Oh, well, why does that matter? Why does that matter? Like at some point, you're just going to hit bedrock. Like that's just what I value. If you don't have those values, I don't know what to tell you. Like you're asking like, oh, well, what's the compelling case to care about these things? I gave you thought experiments to demonstrate where your view leads to. If those don't compel you, like the things that you signed off on, I find pretty, I mean, horrendous. Like, but if you don't find that horrendous, like I don't really have anything further to tell you.
Yeah. Well, okay.
I suppose the problem, if I could just respond to that, the problem is that you haven't really given an answer to any of the constituent parts of sentience. So just to take physical pain, for example, what's the moral case against it? And your response has essentially been, well, it hurts, I don't like it. Oh, well, and then I asked the question, well, if someone doesn't have that physical ability to feel pain, they don't have that, does that matter? And you say, no, it doesn't matter. So then if it doesn't matter when they don't, well, morally, it doesn't matter. I assume you wouldn't kill someone if they, would you kill someone if they had congenital analgesia?
You're conflating two different things. You're conflating two different things there. On one hand, you're saying, okay, it doesn't matter enough such that a being would completely lose moral value. And you're conflating that with, well, it doesn't matter at all. Those aren't the same two things. You can think that a characteristic matters, but it doesn't matter sufficiently such to make that being non-morally valuable. That's the
okay. So then, if
you're making here,
I think the issue. So what you seem to be saying then is that a person who, say, has congenital analgesia and can't feel pain, that they are slightly, not totally, but slightly less deserving of rights.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, but what I would say
it depends on what the rights are for.
I would say like the moral value has changed. I don't think there's it depends on like the cases. Like if you have someone who can't feel pain at all, and you do something to them that's like non-lethal, but would cause pain in an ordinary human, but won't cause pain in this person, then yeah, that's going to be less bad if you did it to this person than if you did it to a person who has pain, who can experience pain. Like if I go if I could just go and like stomp on someone's foot, for example, that would be wrong. I mean, if I'm causing pain to someone, if I do that to someone who doesn't experience pain, like I don't think the moral evaluation is going to be the same thing if one person is experiencing pain and the other is not. It's going to be a different moral evaluation of those two actions based on the fact that one being is experiencing pain and one's not.
Well, I think Carson wants to ask his questions, but I guess that is the summation of the conversation. Really, there is that you think that it may be morally permissible to hurt someone who can't feel it. I don't think it is. I don't think it's ever okay, even if it doesn't cause damage, to stamp on someone's foot just because they can't.
Like,
well, I would say that
on the ground. Do you think I'm hurting the rock?
No, but if you stamp on someone's foot, even if they can't feel it, it's still wrong.
Okay, well, I just don't know what you mean by hurt there, because on my usage of the term hurt, I wouldn't be hurting that person. Unless you're saying there's some sort of emotional suffering involved. But if you're talking about a situation where doing something literally is not causing any suffering at all, I would not say you're hurting them.
I think it's morally wrong to perform an action on a living human being that would cause pain, that only doesn't cause pain because they have something wrong with them. I think that's abusive behavior.
Do you see the same do you have the exact same moral evaluation though? Like you're saying it's wrong, but is it equally wrong in both cases, would you say?
Yes, it's wrong. I mean, just to say, to punch someone assuming that you knew it wasn't going to bruise or damage them, it's wrong to punch someone even if they're not going to feel it.
Okay, so but it's
Yeah.
equally
Morally
as wrong as if they would
wrong.
feel it. It's equally
Yes,
wrong,
it's
right?
equally as wrong. You
Okay,
should not punch other people.
Would you
me
find
ask
it
you.
equally wrong if there was a burning building, there's a 25-year-old and a 99-year-old, and do you think that it would be wrong if you chose based on age who to save?
Sorry, was that to me?
Yeah. Just because I think with what Travis is talking about is, sure, you shouldn't step on the foot of anybody, whether they can feel it or not, but one would be worse. Like, I think we can look at situations and say that, like, if somebody has a higher likelihood of having a better life, if there was somebody that was severely mentally challenged in a building and somebody that wasn't, and it's a burning building, or if there's a 1-day-old baby versus a 20-year-old, I feel like we can view, even though we want to give them all worth, we can view one as worse than the other.
Well, I could answer the question by saying so the process that you're referring to is something called triage. It's something that the emergency services do. It's actually, I don't know if you've seen iRobot, but in the beginning of iRobot, it's a 20-year-old movie, so I'm going to spoil it for you. I'm sorry, but in the beginning of iRobot, a robot which is conditioned, which is programmed to save human beings, makes the decision to save an adult man over two young children who are drowning in cars that have fallen into the river. And the reason for that is because it's programmed to recognize that the adult man is more likely to survive than the two infant children. And the person who gets saved has a great dilemma about this because he feels guilty that he was saved, etc. The question that I would ask is, because that's an ethical decision. Who do you save? Can you save them? Is there more likelihood of one surviving over the other one? Would you save your own son over the son of another person? And all those kinds of considerations. So the question that I would ask is, having saved one of the people, does that make the person that you left behind any less human and any less deserving of basic rights?
No. Okay. So, real
I
quick.
just want to ask
go for it.
one question, because the thing I'm trying to get here is, does suffering hold moral relevance at all? Like, let's say you had a choice between, or let's say that in one scenario, like someone is pushed into a torture chamber, and they're tortured and they die. And let's say they're tortured for 5 hours and then they die. The chamber kills them. So that's one scenario. This is a typical person. They'll experience brutal, extreme suffering while in that chamber. Now, on the other hand, you have a person who doesn't experience any suffering at all. They don't experience any physical pain, and they don't even experience emotional pain. But let's say they still experience happiness. If you were to take that human being and shove them into the torture chamber, and they're also in the torture chamber for 5 hours, and then they die, on your view, there would not be any morally, one of those wouldn't be morally preferable. Now, I'm not asking if they're wrong. I'm asking if one's more wrong than the other. You would say those are morally equal. Neither of them is morally preferable.
Yeah, I would say one of them is ethically preferable, or you might say it's logically preferable, but I would say that they're both morally equivalent.
Yeah, I don't know what it means for something to be logically preferable, and I also am not sure entirely what it means for something to be ethically preferable but not morally preferable.
Well, it's to say that the person who isn't going to experience pain would be the preferable person to put in that position because they're not going to experience pain. But if you're doing this, if you're taking both of these people against their consent and putting them into a position where you're inflicting something on them, then it's the fact that you're taking them without their consent, which is the moral consideration, because I don't think that suffering itself is the marker for what's moral or immoral. So, for example, as you can see, I'm quite the specimen. Go to the gym occasionally, and the gym, it hurts. It's tiring. It's exhausting. You can rip your quads. I don't know what those are, but you can rip them. You can hurt your muscles. You drop a weight on your foot or whatever. That's suffering. It's hard. It hurts, but it's not morally wrong to suffer. Suffering in itself is not bad. It's too shallow a reason to it's too shallow a foundation for morality, because if you say that all suffering is wrong, suffering is bad, suffering is immoral, then going to the gym would qualify. You would have to then be super specific, suffering in this particular context, blah blah blah. I think the easiest thing to do is just to say that the human life has sanctity, human liberty, the ability to choose, the ability to reason and act upon that. That's what should be protected.
Well, saying that suffering is intrinsically wrong, that doesn't entail that it would be wrong to go to the gym. I don't see a contradiction between holding that suffering is intrinsically bad and that it's morally fine to go to the gym.
Because it hurts.
Okay, so I have to put a pause on this. And if you guys want to do a talk again, we can set it up. I do want to ask two questions. I have what I view as somewhat challenging questions to each of your abortion stances, and then I got to hop off here because I got to go do a thing. But first question for Harley. If there was a case where we could know, hypothetical, this could not happen, where a baby is born, and once it hits 3 months, it's never going to develop any further, and it's going to live for 100 years. So it's whatever level of sentience, whatever level of consciousness, it's at it, and it's the size it's going to be. Now, 100 years worth of this baby being 3 months. If we knew this was going to happen, do you think humans morally owe this 3-month-old, 100-year-old human keeping it alive?
So it's stuck at 3 forever.
Yeah, stuck at 3 months
until it dies.
And it'll be around for 100 years, and people could keep feeding it formula or getting breast milk from various different women over the years, and people can hold it and take care of it. But would you find it acceptable if people wanted to just humanely put it down, or do we owe it life if we have the capability?
Yeah, of course. Oh, yeah, we do. You do not have the right to kill a human being just because its development is stunted. Because you could ask the same question of if you have someone with Down syndrome, or you have someone with a severe cognitive impairment who can do little more than dribble into the carpet. And they require constant supervision, but they can experience things and a bit of pleasure, a bit of pain, but they're just disabled. Well, you shouldn't kill them. No, you shouldn't euthanize them.
Okay, and then Travis, I have a different question for you, but just a real quick, 10-word or less answer. Do you have a different answer than Harley for that first question?
So the question is, would it be okay to humanely euthanize it?
Yeah, if it's never going to go past 3 weeks or 3 months or whatever I said.
Okay, well, if it's conscious, then no, I don't think it would be permissible to euthanize it.
Okay.
I would dispute the framing of that's humane.
Gotcha. Okay. But I'm going to move on just for the sake of time to your question I have for you. So let's imagine that we know for sure, and we can use a machine and detect when sentience arrives, and we can know that a human fetus is going to have sentience at 12 weeks. And let's say that a human fetus is going to have consciousness at 24 weeks. And we can detect every element of what that looks like, and we can all agree on what sentience and consciousness is. But let's say that how a human develops is that at 12 weeks it gains sentience, but then the 13th week it completely loses sentience. 14th week, it has it back. 15th week, it completely loses it. And this is just a weird development of happening. And so in between the 12th week and the 24th week, every other week, there will be zero sentience and there is no consciousness until 24. Would you say that this back and forth and without having had consciousness would make it acceptable to terminate it during the 16th week or something like this, where the sentience has left?
So I would have to ask first how you're differentiating sentience and consciousness, what you mean by those two terms in the question.
Yeah, so from my understanding, consciousness arrives around 24 weeks, somewhere in there, and that might be the ability to maybe hear sounds and like detect them, to have various different ways of the brain detecting different sensations, where the sentience would be maybe the first time that you can start feeling levels of suffering or pain.
Yeah, so in terms of how I use those terms, I use the terms sentience and consciousness interchangeably, and I
Oh,
use
okay.
it to basically mean subjective experience.
Okay. Well,
So
let me
I,
reframe the question then. Let's just say sentience and consciousness is the same thing. It starts at 12 weeks. And then between 12 weeks and 24 weeks, every other week, it actually completely loses it. And that's just part of the development cycle. Would you say that once it gets it, then it's safe? Or would you say that at the level of the capacity of a 12-week-old fetus, that since if it were to lose it for a week, it regaining it wouldn't be an individual worth protecting the fact that it already had it once?
so I would say that in the case that you're describing, I would think that being does have moral value. It is worthy of protection.
Okay. Once it has it, it doesn't matter if it goes away. It would be the 13th week of no sentience would be similar to a coma patient that loses their sentience, and they will regain it.
Yeah, well, it's not that
Okay.
it doesn't matter if they lose it. It's what it's that if they're going to regain it, then they're still valuable. Like
Okay.
temporarily losing it doesn't revoke moral value. I think there's a moral distinction between temporarily losing sentience and permanently losing sentience. I place a moral distinction between those two things.
Gotcha. Okay. I wish I had more time to let you guys do back and forths based on those two questions, but I absolutely don't. But it was great talking to you guys. Travis, I'll see you on Monday. And Harley, let's set up another talk soon.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carson.
All right. Take care, guys.
Okay, bye.